and tonight I'm joined by Sir Simon Mayall, Lieutenant General, is that right?
Correct.
And also back as left in the corner. He's smiling away there. We've got Matthew Sadler. He's the voice of socialism.
The voice of reason, I think they say.
The voice of reason.
Common sense.
Serious point, Sir Simon. 2 years tomorrow, we saw the outbreak of the war in Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's a war we keep saying, where Russia take ground, then the Ukrainians fight back. With the backing, the generous backing of the West, we know that Russia's being backed by other countries, such as Iran and China.
Korea, China.
Is it a war that Ukraine can win?
It's a very difficult war for them to win on their own, Lee. We should all be extremely grateful that the initial aid we gave to Ukraine 2 years ago stopped Putin's attempt to decapitate the Ukrainian regime and defeat the Ukrainian army. We'd be left with a very difficult and different situation. Because the Ukrainians have held on remarkably well. We could be in such a different place. But their resources are finite. They absolutely depend on Western support or Allied support to stay in the field. And if they don't get it, the Russians have every chance of being...
But why is it, Simon, that it's so important to help Ukraine? Because it is a very strategic country for us in the West.
It's a very strategic country. I think people don't quite realise how important it is for gas, for minerals, for grain, and you'll remember the stoppage of grain by Roscoe, let alone the fact that it's standing up to blatant aggression by Russia, which, as we know, having seen Navalny being killed the other day, is under the leadership of an absolute psychotic, paranoid, delusional leader. And if Ukraine collapses, then where are the Baltic states? Where is Poland? Where's the NATO alliance, particularly when we know some of the issues that have been debated in America at the moment and Trump's latest? So it's really important the Ukrainians prevail in this, and they need Western support. We're not exactly putting our own troops on the line. So the Ukrainians are paying the blood, we're paying the treasure.
So that's a fair point, Matthew, that we're not putting troops on the front line, but we're coughing up financially with arms, we're supporting Ukraine. You're on the left of politics. Are we doing the right thing?
I think we're doing the right thing. And it's important, though, to check ourselves and to keep having this conversation 2 years on, because you think of how many Ukrainians have died. I mean, obviously, that is a Ukrainian decision. But I think just by last summer, 70,000 or something, 70,000 Ukrainian troops had been killed. That is a gobsmacking number. If you think of the families affected by that and the friends, so many people now in Ukraine will know that. I think officially, actually, it's a state secret how many Ukrainians have lost their lives. So they certainly are paying the blood price. But we have to remember how also we felt when Putin invaded Ukraine for the second time 2 years ago. We were outraged that this sovereign country on European soil was being breached. I think to some extent we have to hold on to that, because if you give in to bullies, we know there can be very, very dire consequences. One concern I have, though, is that they did a poll very recently of about 12 EU countries, and barely 10% of Europeans, according to that poll, think that Ukraine will actually win this war. So what does that mean? What is an acceptable negotiated settlement if that has to be the case?
And actually, it's worth taking up Matthew's point there about casualty levels. 70,000 is every man and woman in the British Army dead, let alone the wounded that Matthew's referred to. So they are doing our fight, but it is very interesting. There is not a solidarity within NATO to keep them in the fight.
I think we can learn lessons also, Simon, from history as well. We look back to Churchill's time in the early 1940s, 30s, when it seemed that the whole of Parliament was against him. They weren't listening to him, and he foresaw what was coming. And in the end, he proved to be right, which might have been unpopular with Parliament. It might have been unpopular with the public at that stage. But sometimes you have got to make a stand. And if we give in to Putin, if we don't support Ukraine, then who's next?
Yeah, absolutely. What price the NATO alliance? What price solidarity? What price other allies around the world? In the Far East, in the Middle East, who will look that the West doesn't have the capacity to sustain. But you've got to pay your insurance premiums. With the crisis.
But you talked about the numbers in our armed forces these days. We see it's decreased, and there will be arguments that we've got more technology, etc., so we can fight wars and battles differently. I understand that. Let's talk about wokery in the armed forces. We see the bits of wokery creeping in the Air Force and in the Army. That bothers me because, you know, I've got a lot of friends who have served in the forces. My dad himself, he served in the forces. And there were times of tough discipline. I know when national service was in the 50s, they were, you know, they had a proper initiation, should I say, to get the armed forces, and they were sometimes treated harshly, but there was a reason for that.
Yeah. Well, my father was Air Force. He commanded RAF Northalls up the road here. The key, like every bit of public service at the moment, is you've got to keep reminding yourself what the purpose of an organisation is. We are here to fight His Majesty's enemies and prevail, not to fight and lose. And the key is that everybody who comes in, of course, you know, things have moved on, society's moved on, but the core requirement for the armed forces is to fight on behalf of the nation, alongside allies. And people must remember, it's not, you know, this is not an organisation where it can be about me. It's about the person next door to me and the person next door to him or her. Hence, in a God, Queen, God, King country, your platoon, your troop, your squadron, your regiment, the army. And the great thing is, you know, we invest a lot in the individual, quite rightly, to build the team, which requires people to, you know, subordinate some of their requirements in order that we complete the task. And that task is absolutely, you know, vital. And we do need our politicians to understand, you know, what we're going to ask our young men and women to do.
Matthew, do you think us politicians do understand what our... I know there's quite a few ex-forces in Parliament, many of my colleagues that have served in the armed forces, but do you think that, on a whole, we truly understand what our armed forces are all about and what they have to do in the heat of the moment sometimes?
I think there's a huge divide in our society between people such as myself who have never served and haven't considered serving, and those who are brave enough to do so. Actually, I interviewed Sir Malcolm Rifkin not long ago, and he was one of the first, maybe even the first, Defence Secretary who hadn't himself been in the military. And he felt actually that the army were relieved about this because they didn't want someone who'd been relatively junior bossing them around, so there could be a danger. Grant Shapps, of course, has not been in the military. On the question of wokery, my worry is that we don't want to drag our armed forces into yet another culture war. What really matters is, are we recruiting enough? Probably not. Is our Trident missile working? Well, this week we found out, terrifyingly, no, it doesn't seem to be because it malfunctioned. Are our aircraft carriers working? Well, eventually one did set sail for these NATO drills, but both of them failed to get off at first time of asking. These are massive concerns. When we hear this week that Russian planes have been flying close to British airspace, these are worrying times. We shouldn't underestimate the threat of Russia. We need robust armed forces. We don't want to drag them, if we don't need to, into culture wars.
Perhaps we need Jeremy Corbyn back. He'd sort this out, wouldn't he?
Please, let's go there.
But Matthew, you know, he talks about we're ill-equipped, we're ill-prepared, etc. But has it always been that way with the British Army?
There is an element of it. It's inevitable. In times of peace, governments very justifiably will invest in other parts that prioritise healthcare, benefits, all the things that make life, in inverted commas, worth living. But the reality is there is a duty of leadership to remind people that this is not a given, which is what Churchill was saying, that you cannot guarantee that this will not be taken away from you. You and I can recall, if we're looking back at the anniversary, 2 days or 24 hours before the Russians came into Ukraine, people were going to cafes, restaurants, love affairs, opera, you name it. And suddenly, overnight, it's gone. And unless you're just prepared to have honesty with your public about, you need to invest. And we've been taking a peace dividend for far too long, frankly, since the high days of the fall of the Berlin.
Now, there was a time, Matthew, when young men wanted to sign up to fight for Queen and country, back in King and country, back in the day. It doesn't seem to be that way these days. Is it time to bring back national service?
I'm not sure it's time to bring back national service, but I was out to dinner with my wife last night. We were both very concerned about whether there is an appetite in our society to sign up. We need to make sure that, should the worst happen, we have a degree of preparedness to do our duty for our country. I mean, I'm 44 now, so I might be a bit old, but I hope, and I use the word hope because you only really know when you're tested, but I hope I would sign up if needed. And we want that to be the case right around Britain. And you make a very, very good point, actually, that those Ukrainians, they didn't necessarily see this coming. I mean, if you look at Instagram at the time, people were doing their gym sessions and all the rest of it, and from one moment to the next, suddenly you've got one of the most powerful armies in the world trying to invade your capital city. And that should be a reminder to all of us.
Yeah, I'm going to visit my regiment in Poland next week, and we'll make the point, that we should be proud to be in the army precisely because it is a difficult job that demands extraordinary amount of subordination of the self. We're back to, is it all about me? No, it's not bloody well about me. It's about the regiment, it's about the other soldiers, and it's about the nation we defend. And actually, the wokery is really bad for people within the army. Of course, we respect individuals, quite rightly. We're much more diverse, much more inclusive. But at the end of it, that is only as good as what it contributes to fighting power. And I think our nation expect, we are a great martial nation. We're a militaristic nation.
But when you look through the pool of, no disrespect to the army, Simon, when you look through the pool of people they normally draw from, I've seen it in my own community, it's normally young lads. A lot of the time come from impoverished backgrounds. They want to get away from home. They've not had a good home life. And they're looking for a family to join. They're looking for friends. They're looking for family. They're not interested in this wokery nonsense. They don't want to drive a tank over the hill and fire glitter bombs at the enemy and play loud music and stuff like that. They want to get stuck in, don't they?
You're absolutely right. And you've got to look at the demographic. Of course, we want to reach out. It's a national organisation. There's a huge part for all communities to contribute to the nation's defence. But actually, many of them are precisely the people you talk about.
Yeah.
We need to get them in numbers, give them an exciting job. You're quite right. And they want to come in for the excitement of being in the army. They like the pride. It's the family.
Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, we'll turn out, most of them, we do have others who are homeless and prisons, I get that. But most will turn out far better citizens. So it's an investment in the nation.
Last word to Matthew, is an investment in people.
I mean, no, I don't have anything intrinsically against, say, for every school leaver to do a month, immediately after they finish school, do a month of some sort of military training. It would invest in citizenship apart from anything else. And the idea of the collective, the idea of a national identity, which can sometimes be a bit wobbly. I mean, we're sitting in one of the pubs that are devoted to England rugby. We get around the flag at sport, but maybe that is a good idea. I'll just remind you one final thing. My grandfather won the Military Cross, right? He was a public school boy. He started out as a private peeling potatoes in the Second World War. He became one of Montgomery's aides de camp. And he won the Military Cross, one of the biggest medals for bravery, because he went up to the German lines on his motorbike and showed huge bravery, right? That is just a couple of generations away. Since we as a country face an existential threat, we have to take this seriously.
Great word.
Good to hear from Matthew.
Yeah, well, look, a fascinating discussion once again. Great guest.